Muted. Unmuted.
And thanks everyone for coming out and attending today. We're going to be taking a look at watched folders. So watched folders are a function that's available in FileHold to connect FileHold to other parts of the system to bring documents over. So it's a basic automation function. It's available in the desktop application, or FDA, FileHold Desktop Application. So this isn't something you can use the web client for. We have a limitation for that. Now this can watch any location the system can see. So if you can see the folder, you should be able to bring documents over from that folder. So that includes a shared drive, that includes FTP sites, I believe it can include OneDrive. So it's anywhere that FileHold can see. If it can be listed on the watched folder list, then you can bring that across. Now it can be set with pre-programmed settings, or it can just transport documents from that location into the inbox. As we all know, the inbox isn't actually the last resting place for the document. It's just a way station. It's a staging area where we get the document ready before it comes into FileHold, but making that connection can often save a lot of time and energy from folks. We can use auto-filing from the watched folder if you have ADI, so automated document importation. It's an optional feature. If you have that, then it will enable that within the document transport. Otherwise, it's just going to bring it over to the inbox for further processing. And finally, multiple watched folders are allowed. So we can do lots of work to bring information over from many different places. You're not just limited to one or two. Now, it's worth saying there are some limitations into here because it doesn't do everything. It's not magic. The first thing is that it does not transfer from one FDA to another. So if I log into another workstation, I don't get my watched folders in that new workstation. I'm limited to those watched folders I have where I was before. The FDA must be logged in to run. This is not running in the background. This is not a headless function. I need my FDA running in order for the watch folder rule to run at that point. It's basically a Windows task that runs using the watch folder function. Now, that means that if you need something to run seamlessly in the background, you should probably take a look at our ADI option, because ADI, that automated document importation, can be used headlessly. It can reach out to the server and bring those documents over. The location also has to be active in order to be watched. So if you have a thumb drive, you could map a thumb drive to there, but if you unplug the thumb drive, then it may not be able to make that connection. Look at it, you may get an error, and the watch folder may not work a second time. So it's just worth being cautious on that it doesn't do everything for you. And it only watches the folder, does not watch subfolders. Again, a regular mistake. People point it at a directory that already exists and think, great, I can just bring these in using the watch folder. That's only the case if the folder being watched doesn't have subfolders. It's only going to bring in that main folder worth of documents. ADI can go deeper, but not the watch folder function. There are some file extensions that cannot be watched. So you can see the list here. Almost all of these are executable. So you can see exe, you can see those kind of documents into here. These are things that could potentially run once they've been added into a program like FileHold, and that can be potentially dangerous. So this is the watched folder doesn't work to ensure that nobody can spoof and get into there and try to load one of these documents in that you don't want it to. Now you can get these documents in other ways. We can store any kind of document, but it has to be added manually. The watch folder function is designed to not work for these. It's not instantaneous. It needs 15 to 30 seconds to find the document. That's the Windows task that's running. Now again, we were expecting here is you're sort of using the watch folder in the background, then you're occasionally coming to FileHold in order to do the work to bring them in. So we want to make sure that you're not expecting as soon as you add the document in, boom, it's suddenly in your inbox. We may see that today. We may see us waiting 30 seconds to see if the watch folder finds it. That's kind of the point of it. The inbox needs to be cleared to add documents to FileHold without automation. So in other words, if I don't have automation turned on and I use a watch folder, that document's in my inbox. It's not in the system. So it's an important thing to make sure that you complete the manage import process, or not manage, the watch folder process to bring those documents into the system. You must clear the inbox in order to add the documents in unless you have the automation turned on. We'll see a bit of that later. And finally, only complete files should be sent to the folder. So don't add documents into there and then change their file name, or save a large document over to a watched folder location, because by the time FileHold finishes finding that watched folder or finding that document, it might have already started the import, and it might do an incomplete import and break the file when it comes into FileHold. So you want to move complete files into the folder. You don't want to do partials by writing a large video file to there, because then by the time that that file is completed, if you had an automation onto it, it'd be grabbed in. The point of this is not to say the watch folders aren't useful. They're incredibly useful. I have 6 of them set up on my personal system that I'm using constantly. So yeah, I love watch folders. I think they're fantastic. But there are some limitations, and as long as we're aware of them, then you'll get a lot of utility out of the software. All right, let's take a dive into my world, and we're going to start taking a look at our watch folder function over here. So let's start off by opening up my desktop application. I just realized I did a reboot, and I don't think I've actually logged in. So we'll do that from scratch. So I'm just going to log into my server. For those who've not attended these before, I'm a system administrator, so I have unrestricted access to all parts of my system. So it allows me to have access to areas. So I'm not worried about my schema or visibility or my cabinet visibility, anything like that. That's all been taken care of for me. So you can see I've created a demo drawer over here, and then 2 different areas, one to be filed and the second one for policy documents. So I'll explain my 2 use cases here before I go into this. The policy documents has an auto-filing rule onto this. So when I apply something to it, I'm going to actually enforce an auto-tagging rule. So that's going to come into effect. Whereas this one down here to be filed, the idea is that I want to get these documents into FileHold as quickly as possible, regardless of metadata. So I'm going to set up a very primitive, kind of a crude watched folder to bring these documents over. Let me show you how to do that. So remember, we're in the FDA, we're logged in. Any user who can add documents can create a watched folder. Read-only user obviously couldn't do that. Limited user couldn't do that. But if you're a full user, you can absolutely do this. So I'm going to come over to my tools, and we're going to select watched folder. And this dialog is going to pop up, and it's going to ask, what do I want to watch? Let me just clear this one off of here. So this is what you'd see if you've never used watched folders before. And then we come over to add. Then this dialog is going to pop up asking us, what do we want to watch? What are we going to make the target for the watched folder? And I've got a folder here called WF1, watched folder 1, and that's what I'm going to use to bring my documents over. And I'm going to say OK to that. The next dialog that pops up here is entirely optional. If I do nothing at this point, I've created a level of automation to this. And let me show you what I mean. I'm just going to save this just like that, primitive watched folder. I'm going to close this out. I'm going to go back into my Windows world. All right, let's make ourselves a document. So we're going to make a Word document, and I'm just going to drop this in WF1. We're going to go back into FileHold, and we're going to go into our inbox, and we're waiting for that that new document that I just added to be brought into there from the watched folder function. And I don't know which one it is here. Let me just double check on my watched folder. This is what I mean by sometimes it can take time for that watched folder to run. I don't know what's happening. Oh, there it is. I just saw it plop in there. So there's our document that we've just added, our new Microsoft Word document. We can see it there, and we can see that we're invited now to set the metadata and set the destination for it. Now, why is that useful? This is, in my case, a place where I was sending the document, but you could also imagine that this could have been a location that I had printed to. So if I was using a print function and I can print an output into there, or I can have it in a shared environment, somebody else adds a document, my FileHold reaches out, grabs it, puts it in the inbox, it's now ready for further processing. Let's make my life easier here for a second. I'm just going to remove all this from my inbox to clear that out. All right, let's go back and look at that watch folder once more. So I'm going to go back into my desktop. And we're going to go into here, and I'm just going to delete these 2 documents because I actually don't want to bring these in right now. So, and we'll clear those. Okay, perfect. So we've got an empty inbox. We're now going to go back into FileHold, and I'm going to go back into my settings for watched folders, and I'm going to go into my tuning there. Now, this is something I often point out to people. I've got a mouse, it's an arrow. As soon as my mouse goes over top of the title, it turns into the finger, and that means I'm going to select this. So we select it, now we can open up our settings. So let's look at the use case where I'm using this as a pre-filing process. I'm bringing the documents in. My intention is to look at this folder later and do additional processing on it. I am a low-level user. Let's imagine I'm not actually dealing with the filing of documents, simply bringing them into the system. So we set a destination for the folder, and then we choose where that's going to be. So in this case, I'm going to choose my to be filed and say OK. Now, I could also use an auto-filing rule because I have ADI going on. So if I had an auto-filing rule that I wanted to use, such as some of my different processes here, I could do that. But I'm not going to use this because I want to treat this in a non-ADI environment where I'm going to choose a single location. If I don't have a location where this is going to live, or if I want to apply an auto-filing rule and I don't have ADI, then simply turn this off. The documents will go to your inbox. You can grab them and process them further using the auto-filing rule, just like you would any other document. What I'm doing here is I'm shortcutting so I don't have to manually add documents in, which again, time saver. All right, but let's set that destination. Then let's also set ourselves metadata for the input files. So I'm going to open this up here and I'm going to choose my temp document type, where I have no metadata except for notes that I might want to attach to this. So the idea here is that I'm creating something that is literally meant to be a temp document. This is not its final resting place. This is not where the document's going to live, and it's not been properly processed. But it gets it out of that individual environment, out of that shared drive or whatever it is, and puts it into the structured environment of FileHold, where the document is now protected, it's secured, and you have access control to it. If there's a text layer to those documents, that's now searchable once it goes in. If you have the server-side OCR function and it's a PDF or a TIFF, then that text is now searchable just by adding it in. Oftentimes, getting the document into the system is the biggest priority, but I don't want to downplay the value of the metadata that I might attach to this later. In this use case, the idea is it's a low-skilled operator who doesn't really know what they're doing. They don't have the deep depth of background, but they can create the watched folder to do this work for them, so they don't have to manually go out there and look for the documents. So we set this up for ourselves. I'm going to ask this to automatically send files to the library, and I'm even going to ask it to delete the input files after they come in. So do the full automation process for this. Now we're going to save that, and I'm going to close this. So we're going to go back over here to the to be filed, and the idea is that I'm somebody who's going to be watching this from my view. But if I was somebody else, and let's say I'm responsible for the documents that are getting landed into there, I might want to then be alerted of changes. So I set a subscription to it, and then when somebody else adds documents into there, I get an alert and I know what I can go and look for that information. In this case, I'm not going to get an alert because I'm adding my own documents to my own area. So I'm not going to get an alert for that. That's okay. Let's go back into our desktop and we're going to make ourselves another test document. Let's make it an Excel document and let's put a Word in front of it so that we know our document, and we're going to drop this into the watched folder area and bring open FileHold again inside that area. So once I add that document in, kind of your clock is ticking. So I've got somewhere between 15 to 30 seconds before FileHold runs that Windows task, goes out, looks for that document, and brings it in. If after a minute's time, if I don't see that document there, I might go over to the inbox. Maybe there was an issue with it coming in, but in this case, there wasn't. Here's my document. It's in the system. It's now part of that. If I open this up, you can see that I'm the owner of it, so it's owned by Chris. I've got my date and timestamp as to when it was added in, so I have that information as part of it. Any metadata that I wanted pre-assigned to it, I could have included that up here. So again, it's not saving me all the work. There's another step to do, but now this is at least in the system. It's searchable, it's protected, it's there, now ready for the next person to pick this up. So it saves me all the work of having to go out and manually look for those documents, saves me the work of having to add that into the inbox and do that level of processing, because now I can do things like I could use my viewer to preview this, to tag the document information into it, so it's saving me a few steps of activity. That's kind of the whole goal of a watched folder. So there we've got our first case scenario. Now let's take a look at a slightly different one. We're going to go into our watched folder settings again, and this time we're going to turn off my automation because it's not all going to work for this. I'll explain why in a moment. And now we're going to change our folder location. Instead of the to be filed, we're going to change this to the policy docs, which remember has an auto tagging rule that's already been enforced to it. So we're going to say, okay, my schema is now fixed. It must be HR policy documents because that's part of the auto tagging rules. Let's just explore that quickly. Let's go into my properties for that folder. And we're going to see that in the folder under auto tagging, I have pre-selected that my name is the reviewer because after all, I'm the person reviewing this document. And I'm even going to do the date added because I'm always going to be adding it by today's date, which I'm enforcing onto this. Now the type of document, who sourced it, and any notes, I don't know what those are going to be until the document comes in. So I'm going to have to leave it in this kind of status, but that's at least a little bit of information saved for me. And I'm going to say okay. So now we're going to go back into our watched folder settings. And we're going to come into this and we're going to reselect that policy docs. And we're frozen into HR policy, and you can see date added and my name. Not only have they been fixed onto this, but I can't change them. They're locked in because they're controlled by the folder. So this is where auto tagging can really go to a different level because I can say that this is always going to be this information and pre-select it against the document. Now I'm not going to do anything else for this because I don't want to pre-select these fields. The problem is if I try to save this right now, FileHold needs any of the required fields complete before it's going to allow me to do the automatically send files. So if I try to save that, it flags an error because I don't have this selected. If I turn that off, but keep the delete input files and save, then it remembers all of those settings for me, and we're back to where we started. So now I can close this out. We're going to go back down to here, and oops, sorry, I opened up Outlook, my mistake. Back to our desktop, and we're going to create, let's make ourselves a new Word document, and we're going to go away Outlook, thank you. And we're going to call this HR policy widgets. So I've got a name for this, and let's imagine instead of this being just a fake document, it was a real document. So let me just see if I've got, so I'm just going to open up a PDF here. Just going to copy all the text from this. It's just a bunch of lorem. We'll close that out. Oops, wrong one. Open up our Word. And let's open up, I don't know why my PDF was doing something strange there, but it doesn't matter. We're going to look in our computer, we're going to look in our desktop, and we're going to find our policy widgets document, and then we're just going to paste that information onto there. So I've put all that information in, and now we're going to close this, and we're going to save it, and I can minimize FileHold again. So I've got my document. Maybe I'm not the author of this. Maybe this came in from an email and I've just added it over here, or maybe this is actually a link to someone else's drive. It doesn't matter. I'm going to put my document now into this folder, and we're going to let that watch folder rule run. Now, if I stay over here in policy docs, it's never going to come in because the automatically send has been turned off. I need to be up here in my inbox waiting for this document to arrive that way. So when this comes in, if I've properly configured my watched folder, then when the document arrives, it should have the schema defined, it should have the location defined, and it should have 2 out of the 5 metadata fields that are attached to it already defined. So there's my document. Schema is defined, going to is defined, but info is required because I have required fields that have not been completed. So here I can choose my type of document, so it's construction materials, and this was sourced by Arthur. So I've got those 2 fields completed, and now that because that's information that I know about the document, I can save it. The document is flagged as ready to send, and I can send it into the system. So off it goes. I can now go back over here to policy documents, and there's my document along with the naming conventions that I've done to it, which is the original file name, plus the subject matter, plus the date. So that's been imposed to it automatically. So I've gone from multiple clicks to only a couple of clicks to bring that document in, which is a huge shortage in the amount of time and work that I'm spending to put that document in. So watch folders are something that anybody can build. The point of them is to try to minimize work. If you find there's more work, I would never build a watch folder for something I was only doing once or twice. I do things for watch folders like when I do a training session and I train people, I put the video from that into my watched folder, and then the next time I fire up FileHold, it picks it up, brings it in, I tag it with a bunch of information, I put in the rest of the details that I can see on the document so I know what's happening with it, and then once that goes into the system, I can store that. So basically, skips that step having to go in and manually add those documents. That's being done for me. So I'm a huge fan of this feature. I think it's a very powerful tool, and I do hope people can use it. If you do have the ADI function, there's some additional things. Sometimes we're asked about, like, do we have a headless watch folder that is ADI, where it's the server that's looking, and because the server doesn't turn off, it's always looking at areas. Whereas when we're looking at a watch folder here, my FDA needs to be logged in and it needs to be on this workstation. So that's another challenge of this. If you have multiple workstations that you're using the FDA from, you may need multiple watch folder rules in different areas. So that's just, again, some more food for thought.